Let's not get too intimidated by the title. It's kind of a cheat sheet that I prepared just this morning just to familiarize yourself with the very basic concepts. Uh, this would be the very first slide. Just before moving to the actual points of discussion, I'd just like to clarify two concepts. Now, I tried to read this essay called "The Little History of Photography" by Walter Benjamin, and kind of there, and also in this essay, which Anandita talked about, the idea of reproducibility, which is also there in the essay called "The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction." So, we primarily use this thing called a camera and not a scanner, because pages which are around 100 to 130 years old, they tend to be really fragile, and therefore the exposures must be taken using a digital camera, and the flat bench scanner উপরে যে সাদা অংশটা থাকে ওটা যদি একটা কাগজের উপর দিই কাগজটা ভাঙবে। So এই যে reproducibility যে টার্মটা, Walter Benjamin used this term to signify a series of ideas. First of all, the industrial reproduction of images. আমি এই স্লাইডটাতে পরে আমি আরেকবার আসবো। আর second, the meanings and values are flexible, see, and the reproduction of the potential of the present. Reproduction of the potential of the present. Now, this is not really the whole picture. I'm just cherry picking a part of the essay to clarify my concepts, which relates to the idea of digitality and the concept of digital photography. So, there is a very great essay by Bessie Kava. It's called, it's there in the book called Cambridge Critical Concepts, and the exact book is called Literature and Technology, I think. So, Bessie Kava was analyzing Epstein's theory on film, and she notes photographed bodies were not people. There were monstrous enlargements of visual data. Now the point in case is this data is never visual in that sense. In case of film, it is something that is of a photosensitive materials, that is chemical, and in case of the digital cameras, it is by default data which is recorded in digital forms, that is in terms of zeros and ones. So this is the thing as of now. So this idea of reproducibility transcends to the idea of digital as well. So we just need to remember the idea that the third point in this slide, that the term realism itself, John Ruskin never used it to mean it in the present sense of the term. John Ruskin used it to describe a pattern of painting which has an excess of reality. So that is called realism in this sense. So the entire point of building a digital archive is to produce and to reproduce it in a timely and on-demand and accessible fashion. Therefore, the question of mechanical or industrial. So kind of a question to the audience is never happens, it's always the other way. Think of whether we can consider the archive itself as an industry. So yes, so why a camera and why to digitize at all? The idea, even digital formats has a certain sense of expiration. It is never permanent. So there is the idea, the idea of production of IIIF compliant images. So the end goal of digitization is to produce images which are compliant with International Image Interoperability Framework Standards, here abbreviated as IIIF. And it emphasizes on two very basic aspects. First of all, the file formats will be accessible across maximum number of systems and devices, since the files will be accessible on the internet, and therefore on a very large pool of people will be accessing a smaller pool of data. And number two, the images to be delivered must have some kind of organizational structure, which we would show you primarily in the file naming portion. So there we can emphasize upon, there we can underscore upon the idea for very robust idea of reproducibility itself. The IIIF aims to cultivate shared technologies for both client and server to enable interoperability across repositories, and to foster a market in compatible servers and viewing applications. So, the second point in this here, remote capture page number 16 mentions, EAP has an extensively broad view of the term archive, and this will also impact on how to digitize a tightly bound manuscript, a glass plate negative, a map, or brittle publication will all need different approaches. Case in point, we have this book called Remote Capture, which has an extremely detailed guide regarding some principles and some guidances regarding how to digitize. কিন্তু একটু আগে সাথী ম্যাডাম যেটা বলছিলেন আমাদেরকে যে প্রিন্সিপালস মে ডিফার, দ্য আউটপুট মাস্ট রিমেইন দ্য সেম। কাজটার ধরন অন্য হতে পারে কিন্তু কাজটার আউটপুট আমাদের একইভাবেই দরকার। So let's come straight to the concept of this very basic thing that is called the exposure triad in camera. যারা ডিজিটাল ক্যামেরাকে হ্যান্ডেল করেছেন তারা এগুলো অনেকগুলো জানেন অলরেডি, কিন্তু তবুও একবার জিনিসটাকে খুব বেসিক করে বলে নেওয়াটা দরকার। আর বেসিক জিনিসটা এট দ্য এন্ড অফ দ্য লাগে খুব বেশি কিছু আমাদের এটা বলছিল যে যখন আর্কাইভাল ফটোগ্রাফি আমরা ফাইনালি করছি তখন জিনিসটাকে এরকম ভাবে হওয়ার কিছু নেই যে জিনিসটা আউটসাইড ফটোগ্রাফির মতো একই রকম হবে। এখানে জিনিসটা খুব সেট কয়েকটা প্যারামিটার্স আমরা জিনিসটাকে যতটা কনসাইজ একটা ওইটা আমরা জিনিসটাকে আউটপুট প্রডিউস করা, দ্যাট ইজ দ্য এন্ড গোল। So the ISO number represents the sensitivity of the camera sensor to the light. Lower the ISO, lesser digital grain and noise, and therefore better quality of the images. This is one thing. The ISO number, this basically exposes it digitally to the light as much as possible, and therefore it comes that as much exposure there will be as much noise in the thing. So keep the ISO to the minimum. I'll just discuss the best practices after the slide. And next part is the aperture thing. Aperture is the diameter of the camera pinhole represented by f-stops. Higher number of f-stops, therefore lesser diameter of pinhole, and therefore lesser the depth of field. So, and the last point is that the shutter speed. The shutter speed is represented in seconds, determines how long the camera curtain must remain open. More shutter speed, therefore lesser distortion of the images due to vibrations, and therefore lesser exposure. তো এই হচ্ছে খুব বেসিক কয়েকটা ব্যাপার। এরপর আমি এরপর স্লাইডটায় যাচ্ছি। Therefore the best practices, as I'm going to discuss now, the ISO number should ideally be set at 100 and therefore never be more than 200, because after 200, depending on your camera brand and the sensor qualities, the grains would start appearing on the images, and grain is considered as a data loss. So you should try to expose yourself not by using the ISO options, but using the aperture and the shutter speeds. So the aperture should always therefore be f8 or lesser to avoid any depth of field, but it should not be more than f20, because with some lenses the images may lack a degree of sharpness. So the next part is the shutter speed may be set by the camera using the aperture variable mode, which should be AV in the dial there, that should be AV in Canon, or by hand using the manual mode. The manual mode requires some sort of precision and understanding while we are doing the photography in the archival setup. So it's generally recommended by the EAPs to just set the camera in aperture variable mode, set the ISO, and the shutter speed would be just determined by the camera itself, and you are supposed to be setting the ISO at the f16 position, f16, or you can also set it just f13 or f16, but anything, the aperture setup should always be more than the f8 number. So yes, so two kinds of lenses here that I will discuss. The lenses should be the prime lenses and the zoom lenses. Now, the prime lenses are usually do have something that is called a fixed and a very wide aperture, and the fixed aperture and the fixed focal length and the wider aperture means that the images are produced compared to a zoom lens will be much sharper. A 50mm prime lens should be considered as standard and is best for capturing pages which which have uniform areas. Cheap and extremely reliable because they have fewer moving parts, and they are extremely durable as well. So yes. Additionally, a zoom lens has variable focal length and contains an additional zoom ring, offers greater flexibility at a fixed position. 18 to 55mm lenses is supposed to be come with APS-C DSLR cameras. So now I want to discuss a very small aspect, that whether you should be actually be capturing the images in prime lenses or in zoom lenses. See, the thing is that in today the difference is very less. Zoom lenses have gone better and better these days, and there is no specific requirements to capture on a prime lens. But the point in question is that if you are capturing images which have, I mean, আপনি ধরুন এরকম একটা কিছু ক্যাপচার করছেন যেখানে আপনার পেজের অবস্থাটা এমন একটা জায়গায় চলে গিয়েছে যেখানে আপনাকে অ্যাপারচারটা f8 এর কাছাকাছি রাখতে হচ্ছে, এবং আপনাকে এমনভাবে করতে হচ্ছে যেখানে আপনার পেজগুলো অনেকখানি ফেডেড হয়ে আছে। So সেখানে of course you should be capturing using a prime lens, and as I said, it's very durable. So we now come to the question of sensors. Sensors are generally of two types, APS-C and full frame. There are of course other sensors, the obsolete APS-H and the medium format, which costs a whole lot more than we can all imagine at this point. So full frame sensors are basically equivalent to the 35mm film. The 35mm film has a diameter, the width of 24mm and a height of 36mm. So it's not exactly 35mm, but since this has come from the days when it was, I think it was coined in the days of film cameras, when everything was captured using a roll of film to capture something that is in video format. So APS-C is 1.6 times, APS-C has 1.6 times smaller surface area, which should be 25.1 to 16.7mm than that of the full frame cameras. The effective focal length here is multiplied by 1.6, and this 1.6 is called a crop factor. The APS-C cameras are generally less expensive and more portable. Point to be noted that although some full frame cameras will support an APS-C lens and vice versa, it is generally recommended to buy the appropriate lens for each type of camera. So yes. Light sources. So I just quote from this portion in the remote capture book. The Endangered Archives program does not recommend using flash to researchers. Some DSLR cameras have a small built-in flash gun, but this should never be used when copying, as it will give very harsh and uneven results, especially at close working distances, and it is likely to cause reflection from the surfaces. So you can understand that when a very sharp bit of light falls for a very small second, timed with the shutter speed of the camera, what happens is that with the reflection there is a significant amount of data loss with the image. So this is the first point. The second point would be, you should never ever mix artificial and natural light, because this alters the color of the images, and the result will be that the page will be producing a very erroneous result when compared with the color checker. So yes, the continuous LED lamps are a must-have in most scenarios, with variable color warmth offering a steady source of light. And in case of unavailability of electricity, use natural light, and the images must be white balanced manually, so using the Lightroom software, because all throughout the day sun has a very different shades of light, and therefore you need to understand that to maintain a parity in the color, that must be white balanced. So yes. Speaking of two types of file formats here, and also the third format, that is the JPEG. First is the RAW. RAW is the equivalent of the film's version of negative. So RAW is uncompressed, unless it's CRAW, which is also there in some cameras, and unprocessed data, or minimally processed. I also must mention these clarifications. This data comes straight out of the sensors. And what happens is that this data cannot be shared easily. You need some kinds of specially equipped softwares to view the embedded JPEG within the raw files. And without that, you cannot actually determine whether the file has any contents or not. So there is actually nothing called a raw file in that sense. There is actually some negative data, and there is no such proprietary extension as .raw. For example, Canon has CR2 for the older and DSLR cameras, and CR3 for the mirrorless cameras. And Nikon has this all-going proprietary format that is called NEF. Just I want to mention that Adobe tried to get this format called DNG, that is called a digital negative, where they actually tried to maintain interoperability across all sorts of raw files, but this format was never that much of a successful. So yes, this is not very much known in this sense, but yes, people still use it. So the raw file contains the maximum number of color data. And another uncompressed format is the TIFF file. TIFF file has an even larger file size compared to RAW, but contains lesser baked-in data. And by baked-in, I means that it lacks any sort of flexibility. You can still import a TIFF file into Lightroom and try to process it, but there would be some sort of some lack of parity when you actually take the actual raw file. So EAP only supports this format for the images. And as Amrita talked about, the idea of JPEG. JPEG is the smallest file size, and it is called the user copy. It is very easily accessible. Almost every software from your phone to your laptop can open the files, and it can also be converted to other formats such as PNG or BMP. So yes, the last part that I'm going to speak about is a mirrorless or DSLR. That is not the question. Mirrorless মানে advanced হয়ে ওঠে এরকমটা নয় basically. 2023 is the era when you say that the overhyped thing that is called the death of DSLR. They have little. What I mean to say is this: they have little differences and more common than they are different actually. So they are not different in terms of sensors, but they have a difference in terms of the viewfinder and and in terms of the shutter. So it differs in terms of so DSLR has an optical viewfinder, it has a mechanical shutter, and this mechanical shutter and optical viewfinder are directly inherited from the tradition of the film cameras. It has much more number of moving parts, so after like 1 million of exposure you need to replace the shutter, because as it moves, as the shutters actually physically moves, the shutter basically wears out. So yes, but that takes around 10 to 12 years to wear out, and that's a huge amount of time. And the mirrorless cameras. Mirrorless cameras is that it has a thing that is called an electronic shutter. Electronic shutter is that the sensor is always exposed with the lens, and the electronic shutters, and along with the electronic shutters, it also sometimes has a mechanical shutter. So the USR10 that we will be showing you has a mechanical shutter as well as an electronic shutter. So it has an extremely lightweight form factor, poorer battery, because it's always in live view mode. What is live view mode? We'll just show you. So this is as of now. I will just call Moitri to